Welcome back to Collab Farm. I'm your host, Jackson Roulette, and today we're going to hear from Kelly Maynard. Kelly is a cooperative development specialist at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperative Development, so she seems like she's in the right place there. Last week, if you listened to my conversation with Lexi Close, we got into some food system scale cooperative work. So this week, we're going to follow that up with some practical advice and tools that you can use when you're thinking about going into cooperative farming yourself or yourselves, as it were. This is the second co-op development person, or fourth, depending on how you define that role, that I've had on this season. To, if nothing else, drive the point home that there are people out there whose life work it is to support the development of your working together ideas. Not only do you not have to farm alone, you don't have to build these cooperative systems alone either. There are tons of links in the show notes to reference, so check those out, along with links to our sponsors who support this show and help us bring it to you for free. So check them out as well. See what I did there? That's a great segue. So first, let's hear from those sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Grow Organic. In our no-till community, we understand that quality growing supplies and selection make all the difference. As the nation's largest independent retailer dedicated to regenerative and sustainable agriculture, Peace Valley Farm and Garden Supply is your one-stop shop, offering 5,000 reliable products, including cover crops, soil amendments, tools, and more. Serving market farmers since 1976, it's before I was born, they understand the needs of growers, both big and small. Save 20% on your first order now with code NOTIL24, that's NOTIL24. Apply for a commercial account for year-round savings and dedicated support. Visit groworganic.com/notill or use the link down in the description to get started today. This episode is also brought to you by ASAP, the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project. The Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, ASAP, will offer the Business of Farming Conference on Saturday, February 22nd in the beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. This annual conference brings together professional and aspiring farmers from across the Southeast to network and share resources to build viable farm businesses. Scholarship for BIPOC and limited resource farmers are available, as well as discounts for farm partners registering together. Absolutely love to see that. Registration opens in mid-November. Find out more at asapconnections.org. That's asapconnections.org. All right, back to the show. Well, Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I've provided a little bit of context in the introduction of the show, but tell us, what it is that you do and where you're from, and a little bit about, I guess, how you got into cooperative development work.
My official title, I suppose, is Cooperative Development Specialist. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Center for Cooperatives. That's kind of a mouthful. Our center for a long time was just at UW-Madison and in the College of Agriculture. Our center got started in the early 1960s, and just 2 years ago, we got moved over into the Division of Extension. So still adjusting to saying that full thing. But yeah, so what, people are, well, what is a cooperative developer? The short version is I help people start new co-ops. The kind of juicier, more descriptive version that I jokingly tell people is I'm a co-op doula and therapist, because co-ops are kind of hard entities to create, to birth, and because they involve people and decision making, and it's messy people stuff, and so hence the therapizing. But our center, I'm one of a team of 3 co-op developers at the center, and I am the person who tends to focus in the food and agriculture space just because of my background. I moved out to Wisconsin for grad school and got my master's in agroecology, and I was doing various bits of work related to local food system development for several years before I started at the center. So I've now branched out and worked and supported a number of different kinds of co-ops, but definitely do the food and ag work as well. And how did I accidentally became a co-op developer. It was not, it was not really the plan. It's not necessarily like a thing you can specifically go to school for. When I finished grad school, I was trying to figure out what to do. And it was a kind of just a timing thing. There was a very newly formed producer cooperative that was just outside of Madison that had gotten started by a group of producers that were all on land at a newly formed farm business incubator that was trying to specifically support immigrant minority farmers. And in the Madison area, what that looked like was they had a kind of a mix of Hmong and Latino farmers. And they had just received some grant funding from USDA and we're creating some positions to do the work that was in these grants. And I applied and got a job. And at the time, I knew nothing about cooperatives. And the work that I was hired to do was to help coordinate kind of like a range of training and technical assistance activities that were for these producers, workshops. And we were, it was a cool opportunity because we had a lot of budget for translation and interpretation. So we were providing all these cool educational opportunities in Spanish and in Hmong that were otherwise, hadn't really been there before. And I speak Spanish. I was in a Peace Corps after college, and so was jazzed to be able to be using that in my work. And but then as the project went on, this group that was technically legally had become a cooperative just, got to the point of wanting to think about how do we work together in that way and market together. And so I cut my teeth on co-op stuff kind of alongside them, like learning how to do it. We did have some co-op experts that we brought in at that point. I was not that person. We were getting some support from the Center for Co-ops, some other staffers at that time. And that was how I got into it. And then I just kind of really fell in love with the pieces about how do you help people come together around a kind of a common goal? And, how do you understand the diverse ways in which people, learn and understand concepts? How do you help them become like a functional group of decision makers? Because at its core, a co-op is a group of people that just have to make a lot of decisions together. So, that is, you got to get good at that. It's a muscle that you have to build and flex. So, yeah. And I met people at the center at that point and stayed in touch, and then was able to snag a job.
I didn't know any of that beforehand. And I find anecdotally, that a lot of those immigrant communities are very, very interested in working together in those sorts of ways, be it formally or informally. It's something that in my own farming experience, I have a small farm myself, and it's actually next door to community gardens that are largely for Hispanic and Burmese populations. They do a lot of their work together. I don't believe they're marketing their material, but it's very interesting seeing the nature of cooperation from different cultures, especially people who are first generation in those cultures. I think that's super fascinating. So that leads into your work at UW. Now, full disclosure, UW has supported some of our podcast work in the past. So go UW. Maybe I'm a little biased. But it also seems like they've got some like really good and comprehensive agricultural programming going on. Just, it's not like I've attended there, but just from the website and hearing from some of the people that have come out of the program, it seems like a great opportunity. So anybody looking for further education, UW seems like a good place to be for agriculture.
Yeah, big ag school. All the things going on. I'm from the suburbs of Washington, D.C. and went to college on the East Coast. So coming out here, I was like, oh, this is crazy.
Now that leads you into your work at UW. What is it specifically that you do at UW? And I'm thinking, like, what does a cooperative development specialist look like maybe day to day? What are some of the things that you're doing right now?
It's interesting. I actually, in preparation for today, I did look back at the podcast you shared when you spoke to Brent Lackey at Keycard. I know
Small
Brent.
world, yeah.
He mentioned in the podcast, Keycard is one of these cooperative development centers that receives USDA funding. We're another one of those, and part of that national network of co-op development centers that's members of this entity Cooperation Works. So we're part of that too. So it's a small world. And a lot, but our center is one of the, most of those centers, we're one of the few that is connected to a university. The majority are not connected to universities. And I think we're maybe the only one or one of the only ones that kind of works across co-op types and sectors, ownership types and sectors, and does a wide, kind of a full swath of range of activities. So we do research on the co-op business model, this direct co-op development, helping people start new co-ops and providing that technical assistance, and then general education and outreach. So, I'm, as a co-op developer, what I'm focusing on is like people come to us in various ways. Now that we're part of Extension, sometimes through county extension agents and other people are like, hey, I've heard some people are interested in maybe starting a co-op. Could you come talk to them? We get plenty of people who just blindly, they find our website, they fill out an intake form. And, one of the key roles that I play initially and our team plays is like helping people kind of crystallize on their co-op idea and figure out if the co-op business model is actually going to be a good fit. It is not always. And it's never like a judgment on, if it's just, I would say of all the intakes that I receive and have, one or a few conversations with people, at least as many people end up not forming co-ops as forming co-ops. And I consider both of those successful outcomes, right? There are plenty of reasons why something's probably not going to make sense as a cooperative, and better that you find that out sooner than later. So, helping people, tease that out. And then, because we work broadly across, a range of sectors and types, we are a bit more generalists than specialists. I've, have some sectoral expertise in a couple of areas, but what I tell people is, there's going to be your business proposition. Why are you coming together, and what are you coming together to do? I may know something about that. I may not. And I can help you find some other, people who do know about that. But what I can help you do is all the kind of, if this is going to be a group of people that's going to function well together, there's a lot of learning that has to happen, a lot of kind of group practice stuff that has to get established. And that's where I come in. That's where I can focus. So I help people form, usually when a group is, before they formally incorporate, we call them a steering committee. So I kind of can help facilitate those steering committees and, help them tap into resources for like doing a feasibility study, getting a business plan together, other pieces of startup, do a lot of helping facilitate the conversations that result in the drafting of articles of incorporation and bylaws, and, can help people get the actual drafts of those documents. We always try to get people to earlier than later establish a relationship with an attorney who has some experience with co-ops, but, we can usually get folks like 95% of the way there, so they don't have to pay a lot, at least on like the, the early document front. and then remain as a resource for that. Once the group incorporates, that steering committee is the board of directors of that co-op, and so kind of remain a resource for them, and that can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes it's just showing up to board meetings and being a resource, designing specific trainings, or finding materials on certain topics. We host an annual co-op director training series that, and we bring directors together from all kinds of co-ops, which can be a fun learning space. So yeah, it's a little bit of, helping be a gopher to track stuff down for folks, but really making sure that people dedicate the time to thinking through the stuff that doesn't feel as sexy or as central to the business proposition, like how are we going to run meetings? What's our decision-making rule? How, are we going to go by consensus and unanimity? Are we voting? Are we, what tools do we use to manage conflict, right? These are the things that are harder to think about. We often have fewer tools to make plans for. So that's where I come in.
At least in farmer land, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a farmer who has a lot of ideas about ways that cooperatives or cooperation can provide opportunities or help address challenges for my own operation, or something that I hear from fellow farmers and whatnot. I feel like there's always a lot of ideas around the space, but if my reaction to you saying all of those things, it's like, if you have an idea, go find a cooperative development specialist to begin teasing some of those out. Maybe these do need cooperation, or maybe they don't, or, and figuring those things out sooner rather than later, and getting some traction on some of these ideas instead of just sitting around and talking about it over the winter every year, right?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I think, one of the things, so I don't know if this came up in your conversation with Brent, but so cooperatives, to some extent, there's like elements in common across co-ops, but every state has their own statutes that pertain to co-ops. And so there are differences across the country. And in Wisconsin and Minnesota have some of the kind of most model comprehensive progressive co-op statutes out there. And one of the things that our statutes allow for are what we call hybrid or multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So these are co-ops that have different kind of types or classes of membership. And there are, probably a dozen examples at this point from within Wisconsin or more. And people get really excited about this idea, right? Because in theory, it's super cool to think about all these different groups of people working together. And so one of the calls I get is people like crazy excited about some multi-stakeholder co-op idea that's got like all the, 6 classes of membership, and it's going to be, and I usually talk people down to as few classes as possible, maybe even just one at the end, or 2. And, I do it not to, I don't consider myself a pessimist, but I think I try to be a realist about this, and ask some hard questions, right? Like, I ultimately want you to succeed. And I obviously believe in the co-op model, or I would not be doing this work. But I also know that they are hard entities. And they're complex without adding layers of complexity. So yeah, it's, I definitely, it doesn't have to be me, but people should talk to co-op developers for sure.
And maybe talk them off the ledge.
Yeah. But also, sometimes we do have tools that, help. And I have this, I don't know if you've ever worked with a lean business model, Canvas, but we have this one pager we've adapted for the co-op model. And it is just all right, map your idea on this sheet. And then what is it? tell, is this a co-op? Is it not? Like, does it make sense when you like put these, answer these questions on a sheet of paper?
Yeah. Is that something that's accessible to everyone?
Is it on our website? We have a lot of resources on our website, and I lose track. I can certainly email it to you, and if it's not there, it's certainly one that I send to like just about everyone who emails or calls us as a tool to use with their groups.
Either way, I'll make sure that it's available in the show notes. I'll get it from you one way or another, so that people can, at least as a thought exercise, go through and start filling something like that out as they think about their idea or looking for a development specialist or something. But yeah, I guess if something that I found in the resources on your website mentioning that was something that you helped publish back in 2017. It was Coordinating Farm Labor Across Farms, a toolbox for diversified farmers and farm workers, which I thought was very apt for this conversation. Is that something that, one, is something that I've thought about a lot, and trying to provide somewhere near full-time employment for folks that want it across various farms that can only afford part-time employment. But yeah, can you just give us a rundown of that particular project real quick?
Sure. So Rachel Armstrong, who founded and still runs Farm Commons, is originally, well, she's not from the Madison area, but she lived in the Madison area for a very long time, worked on some farms around here, worked for some nonprofits around here before she went to law school. And so I knew her through the community, and she was, known also to other folks at the center. And I'm not going to remember exactly how we ended up talking together about this topic. But she's based up in Duluth, Minnesota now. And I think there were some communities more in far northern Wisconsin, that were having these conversations about. There was a kind of a suite of issues, that, farms that maybe, they had full-time roles but very, short seasons, right? Especially the further north you go. But also up there, you have a range of folks who are doing, veg. There's quite a bit of fruit production, and you've got livestock, and those all have different kinds of labor needs with different seasonality. And there's also, it's an area where there's a lot of tourism. And so there's like also an increasing housing challenge for that workforce, or, just straight up housing shortages, and certainly with affordable options. And so we had a couple of kind of forums, focus groups with folks way up in Bayfield or Ashland, to kind of, they were listening sessions. Essentially, we had, we facilitated them and asked them questions and got some feedback. And I had been part of also a farm labor project through another center at the UW campus where I used to work, the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, which is like the Sustainable Ag Center on the UW campus. And so had some experience talking about farm labor issues through that center. And so, I think with the groups in northern Wisconsin, we kind of proposed a couple of concrete possibilities. One of them kind of being this like workforce co-op. And it didn't end up getting enough traction up there. They didn't start it, but we thought, this is an idea. We know that this is a challenge in a lot of places. And so mapping out, like, how would you do this? And what are some of the, legal structures you might use to do it? Was what resulted in that toolbox. And then interestingly, at almost the same time, or might have been just a little bit after we partnered on that with that resource, another of these co-op development centers out in our network, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, actually piloted a project of a farm labor cooperative that was moved around farms, or they coordinated labor across a bunch of different farms. And I just actually recently reconnected with someone who's at that organization, who I don't know the current status of that group. I think it kind of, I don't want to speak for it because I don't know the status of it, but she's like working to kind of reinvigorate it, at least right now. And so it is an idea that has had traction somewhere. And, I would love to, I'm like, wait, just waiting for some, I'd love to help, form one. It is, I imagine, I could see it being quite a complicated, kind of enterprise to figure out. And I think you run up against the challenge of, and this happens also in like small scale marketing co-ops with like diversified producers, the cost of paying for a person or people to do the work of the co-op, like whatever that cuts into your, price you're getting for your product, or in the case of a farm worker, like ultimately a farm would have to pay a higher wage to the co-op for the labor from a farm worker, because there'd be like a little cut that the co-op would need to take for the work it does in coordination, right? So that kind of financial viability piece, I think, is tricky.
One of the quotes that I pulled out of that piece was, if farmers come together to aggregate their labor demands, they can potentially attract a more qualified workforce, share the cost of training and compliance, streamline various HR operations. That's something that I have struggled with myself, is having very good, very highly qualified farm workers, and then trying to leverage ways to keep them around, so that I'm not, you also have to compare that to the cost of recycling your labor every year for new entrants and retraining. And, I've found that the people that I keep around the longest, are familiar with the systems, much faster at every task that I give them to do. So that's an area that I'm excited to explore. And something that I'm monkeying with right now is not just sharing labor across, say, specific types of farms, but various farms, so that the person who is working is getting experience on diversity of enterprises. So say they'll work on a vegetable farm when the vegetable needs are the highest, and then maybe a grazing operation when their needs are the highest, or how, finding farms in which the flow of work is compatible with one another. But yeah, I can definitely see, like, you've got to somehow cover the cost of that administrative overhead, whether it's in-house or whether it's with a cooperative.
And I think, it is one of these things where, in the experience I have working with, smaller scale diversified producers who are, doing, who are certified organic or doing some sort of, marketing, CSA and, a lot of local marketing, it's just so hard to find the time, right? Like everyone's like, in some ways you're like constantly innovating in your business, and you're in part because you have to. And I feel like, and a lot of folks are kind of motivated in that way, but it is like, you do need to take some break, right? Everybody needs to and a couple months in the winter or whatever. And it becomes hard. Like, no, this winter we're going to devote all our time to figuring out this co-op idea, right? It's just like, it probably feels a little bit daunting.
What are some of the elements of maybe successful co-ops that you've had experience with dealing with? Like, do you see any common traits or anything that successful co-ops tend to be successful because they do what?
Doing the early legwork, through what, you can call it kind of like a feasibility analysis assessment or whatever, to understand the reality of the financial picture, and being really real about all right, because of this business proposition, we got to get to this amount of sales or hours worked or whatever to be viable. And just being really clear up front about this is what it looks like, and not constant, and not kind of being deluding yourself about like, well, because we're going to do this as a co-op, it's going to work. So having a real being based, the business vision being based in reality, in reality. And I would say, and having people who are either they kind of get trained up in or come in with some amount of kind of business experience, business mindsets. I think that I definitely have seen groups where people are like, we want to work together and we love people and but like, they're not, when it comes to like, we got to look at the financial statements and and they're like, but do we? I'm like, this is what makes it. Yes, in fact, like this is this is a huge part of this. I would say folks that pretty early on, you can feel there's really a shared vision, right? It's not like there's like a person who's like, and I've recruited these other people, I think, both in addition to that, really kind of shared vision, purpose, a division of labor. It's never going to be equal perfectly across all the people, but I definitely have seen burnout in cases where like one or a couple of people just take on doing all the stuff. And then everybody else really just kind of like relies on them to do all the stuff. And that doesn't usually end well for a variety of reasons. So being really clear about how to disperse the work early on and find it, and it's one thing for people to say, yeah, I want to do this. I'm interested in this. I believe in this. But if they show up and do contribute, that's when it's like, okay, yep, that you really do want to be part of this, or and groups that, like I said, do the tending to that kind of group piece, right? Like they pay attention to trying to have organized meetings. Like, I don't care how much your group loves each other and how much they're committed to the business vision. If you have like hugely long and disorganized meetings that don't feel productive, like people don't want to participate. So, whether it's, getting some help with that, going to some training related to that, but trying to recognize that there's a need for good process with the group. And then, certainly like getting help in startup from, various professionals, including, co-op development folks like myself, but coming back to those people, like recognizing that a board of directors, any kind of board, but certainly in a co-op, like there's always stuff to learn, and it can always be valuable to have a kind of outside set of eyes on, whether it's your financial statements or a current challenge you're working through or whatever, right? So this kind of openness to seeking help and to learning, those to me are huge, I think, and not being in denial when things aren't working. I've seen a lot of people get stuck in these loops when, like, they're not meeting their sales expectations or whatever. And it's not that there's no way out of it. And it's not like, this is not like a reflection on you as a person or whatever, right? It's just like, things are not panning out the way you hoped. So like, let's seek some help and let's try to see if we can figure out why. And what if there's a course correction, I think that kind of that humility and that willingness to be open to bring in help is huge.
That's a struggle even for us individually as farmers, that sometimes our work is not a reflection of who we are as people, and we need help from the outside, or just ongoing maintenance, constantly touching base, even if you think things are going okay, maintaining good communication with other people and working on that constantly, maybe not constantly, but checking in with it. Now, I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, maintaining web stores. Look, if I could spend less time on my phone and my computer and more time actually farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of all the admin, managing orders, customer communications, automating tedious tasks so that you can get back to doing what you love, right? On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers about 6 hours a week. That 6 hours you could, spend time with your family, get back out into the field, or just take a breather. So what would you do with those extra 6 hours? Now is the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Link is in the show notes. This episode is also brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. It is seed browsing season, and High Mowing Organic Seeds is releasing 66, not 65, not 67, 66 new seed varieties for 2025 on November 1st. These beautiful and productive vegetable, flower, and herb varieties are 100% organic and non-GMO and trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. Now, I don't know about you. I follow NOP guidelines and order organic seeds, partially because I have to, but it's very easy to look through their catalog and know that everything is clear and safe for me to order. Just a side note, whether you're trying to bring the best to your CSA, wholesale customers, or the farmer's market, High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingorganicseeds.com to request a catalog. Use code NOTIL25, that's NOTILL25 for 10% off of your order of $100 or more. Again, visit highmowingseeds.com. All right, let's get back to the show. One of the things that you had mentioned that you were working on, one of the projects, was assisting farmers with buying farmland. Tell us more about that project and the cooperative element of that project.
Sure. So this was one of those things that a project that's been a cool outcome of our center being moved into the Division of Extension is that a county extension person in Wisconsin who had been doing some work, and it was connected to some networks broadly working on farmland access. We met and she was like, you need to be part of these conversations. I think there's space for co-ops here. Like, let's see. So there's this entity. Hopefully I represent this mostly accurately because I was pulled in late in the game, but there's this farmland access hub, which has like a lot of partners on it. They have a website, and that hub has done a range of things. They had a summit, I think, a year or two ago, but there ended up being some working groups that came out of that. And one of them was this collective models working group. And there are a number of different kind of collective models out there in terms of different legal structures you can use, et cetera. And I think that I live in a rural area. I don't farm, admittedly, but I live in on some land, and I'm surrounded by farms. And one of the things that I see and I'm very aware of is that the kind of stock that's available for farmland and the next generation of folks interested in farming are not necessarily, is a bit of a mismatch in a lot of ways, right? So what's around me, you've got predominantly like conventional row cropping and dairy farms, right? And those are larger acreage, land holdings, and with, a certain kind of infrastructure that is worth a lot of money, especially. So I'm in the same county that like Madison is in, only a half hour from downtown Madison. And so it's like really high value real estate. And if you're coming in, if you're not lucky enough to have become from a farm family where you might inherit some land, you're just getting into this. And maybe you're like, I only need 5 acres, but what's for sale is 100 acres or, just like, well, what? And I think increasingly I stay tuned in enough to conversations in farming world to know that, certainly in the younger folks getting into farming now, there's certainly a lot of awareness about we don't need to break ourselves. There's a lot we can accomplish in community. We don't need to work alone. We're concerned about work-life balance and relationships and all these things. And so it's nobody, people aren't necessarily desiring to work totally isolated. And so the theory is that you can form a cooperative entity to buy farmland. And so that's pooling, capital from a larger group of people for the purchase of this land. And there are a couple of different ways that can play out. We have at this point, probably a few examples of what I would call or worker cooperative farms. So it's a single farm and it's run like a worker co-op. So the folks who work the farm together are all, employees of the farm and owners of the business. And then there's I'm actually working with my colleague at Extension, working on a guide for this model that would be more like, okay, I'm starting up a farming enterprise, you're starting up a farming enterprise. We find, 5 or 6 other people that have started or want to start their own farm enterprises, but nobody needs, 40 acres or 100 acres or whatever it is. And so we pool our equity to go in on a piece of land together. And amongst ourselves, we parcel it out. We say we're going to divide this up into units of 5 acres or 10 acres or whatever. And membership in the co-op gets you, an occupancy right or a usage right to X number of acres. And then from there, you could imagine maybe joint investment in infrastructure. Maybe there is some joint other activities that happen. So maybe some people do some marketing together, or I don't know, creating value-added products together. There's potential options, but at least at the outset, the purpose of the co-op was for that ownership access to farmland. And in a lot of ways, this shares similarities with the way that housing co-ops are structured. And so in a housing co-op, at least in equity housing cooperatives, you buy a membership share, which gives you ownership in the co-op. The co-op owns all the buildings, the land, et cetera. And then you get occupancy right to a unit. And so this is kind of analogous to that. And in the housing world, at least, there's a model. It's called limited equity housing cooperatives. And so it's a way to build in the intention of affordability over the long term. And so what you say is, and usually this is captured in the bylaws, as you say, whatever that membership share costs to come in, by some formula, we're going to allow that equity share to increase in some value over time at some rate, but it's not going to be market rate. So you're going to keep it, kind of control it, and allow, certainly if I buy into the co-op and I live in my, apartment or my, cottage or whatever for 10 years, and then I leave or I die or, my equity will have grown some amount, which is a lot of what one of the benefits of ownership, right, is that kind of earning there, but it is still not gone haywire because it's not fluctuating with the market. So, you could build a similar structure into this kind of farmland co-op as well, right? So that with the intention over time that we want, in 10, 15 years, whatever, when I move on from farming or somebody needs to leave, and we're trying to bring somebody new in, we're trying to keep it affordable for them.
Yeah, it's not like you're both allowing equity to be built, and there are a lot of different avenues for equity to be able to be accumulated with somebody's production and input on the land. But you're also kind of providing a bit of a headwind against runaway market forces,
right?
At the same time.
Recognizing that one of the whole reasons farmland is so unaffordable now is because of various market forces.
Right.
And I should say, one of the things that we're trying to be mindful of, and so I'm working on this guide, is that there are a number of states, Wisconsin included, that have laws around corporate ownership of farmland, limitations on corporate ownership of farmland, and a cooperative is a type of corporation. And so, it doesn't preclude it from being an option, but there are some kind of limitations. And so we'll certainly be including that information in the guide. But one of the things, to circle back to Farm Commons, is that the team there just came out with this phenomenal resource. Have we talked about this yet? That I will send you a link to it too. So I'm going to not say the name correctly, but it basically is a guide. So forever and ever, right? There's FSA farm ownership loans are like the coveted loan because of low rates, et cetera, right? And there's been this barrier to like, how do you access it as a group of unrelated persons? And the Farm Commons team, like, I don't know, they read the fine print. I don't, anyways, they in theory have like cracked the code on how to do it. Like that if you read enough of the fine print, or I haven't read the whole guide, but it is basically how to access that loan program as a group of unrelated persons. And the models that they cite in the guide are using an LLC like legal structure. But when I spoke to Rachel about it, she was like, I don't know why a co-op structure wouldn't also work. Fundamentally, what you're still talking about is a group of unrelated persons. So, because that was one of the pieces of the guide, is like making sure, like I had wanted to reach out to a couple of, Farm Credit and other entities about like, if an entity came to you wanting to, a co-op entity wanting to borrow farmland, like how would you work with them? And like, what would be the limitations there, et cetera. So I was super excited that this guide was just released a couple weeks ago. And it's in English and Spanish, and yeah, it's on the Farm Commons website. So, there are other people thinking about this, some very key elements of this idea of like, how do groups of people access farmland together, and use the kind of financial systems and things that presently exist.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I will definitely put a link to that below if you all are interested in looking that up. We've got a few minutes left. You had also told me about something a project you were working on with meat producers. And we didn't get to talk a whole lot about that one, but is that something you care to talk about for a minute?
I'm working on two different meat processing co-ops with two different meat processing co-ops right now. The one I probably was thinking of when I mentioned it, it's one that's in some ways had its origins in 2016, 2017, in terms of conversations, a group of livestock producers in Southwest Wisconsin who, just struggling with, lack of good access to processing and the kind of processing they wanted and the kind of slaughtering they wanted. Feeling like, I think this is a thing we have in common. They used, they got some various kinds of grants over years to do some kind of community surveys, assessing like potential demand, et cetera. And then, when the pandemic hit and there was just like everyone who was a livestock producer was like, oh, crap. They, really in earnest, and I had been they would pull me into conversations every so often. And then they were like, all right, we got to get serious about this. And so, and the interesting thing, they are one of those multi-stakeholder or hybrid cooperatives. But I think in this particular case, not that it doesn't add some, complexity that they have to work through, but, because we know one of the many challenges in the, meat processing space is the labor force, right? Having sufficient labor, right? The skills, labor, et cetera. And so this co-op, and they won't mind me mentioning their name, Meat Smith Co-op, they from the get-go were, it was both livestock producers and trained butchers working on this project together. And so it's in co-op speak, it's a producer and worker-owned co-op. And they've had a kind of circuitous path to, finding a facility. And I don't want to I feel almost hesitant to say that it might be close to closing on on a place finally. I don't want that to like somehow not come to pass because I
Knock on
said it out
wood.
loud, but yeah, it's, and as they've, kind of just kept moving forward on this project, certainly the landscape has changed. There's not as acute, the kind of struggle to find processing slots is not as difficult as it was in like certain, stages of the pandemic, but it's still there. And that, and there's still plenty of like challenges as a small producer to, feeling like you're getting the cuts back that you want and the quality and things like that. One of the things that this group is doing is part of their business model is that they're doing it's mobile slaughter with then a cut and wrap facility. So it's not a slaughter floor, kill floor, as part of the facility. And so, yeah, they'll build out a mobile slaughter unit, and then that will bring carcasses to the processing facility. Is generally the what will happen. And I think they're an example where I think by and large a lot of the livestock producers in this group are pretty small scale. A lot of them are doing pasture-based livestock production, but they're not like planning to market together at this point. Pretty much everybody has their own markets already. There is a vision to like maybe 5-10 years in the future, this is all going well, we do end up doing some marketing together, but we're not trying to do that too at the start. And they've been pretty smart and realistic in terms of their thinking about one of the big challenges in meat processing too is the type of licenses you get and inspection, what you set yourself up for in terms of like inspection. And so, I think they're planning to be, custom exempt at the get-go for a very short window of time, and then at least get state inspected. And then there's this, I'll probably say it wrong, but cooperative like interstate programs. So you don't always have to have like full USDA inspection to move be able to sell across some state lines within a small area. And so cooperative, yeah. Anyway, so I don't know that they're going to go for full USDA inspection, which is the most, expensive inspection, certification and inspection options. So they're trying to also be, mindful of like, what do their producers really need? And I think what they're not all trying to ship meat faraway places. So
yeah, I feel like that kind of sums up what you were talking about earlier with elements that you noticed with successful cooperatives, not starting with like grand, everything has to be fully integrated, multi-stakeholder, but starting with really what's a common challenge, and is a cooperative a solution to that challenge, and then saying, okay, maybe down the line we can integrate other elements of it, but what is the bare minimum that we need to solve an issue or a challenge, as opposed to we're all just going to work together and everything's going to be great.
And I encourage groups, right at the outset, when I give them this, co-op startup canvas, like, I don't want to be dismissive of all of your ideas, and I don't think you should, get rid of all your grand ideas, like create a parking lot, bike rack, whatever, like document them, keep them somewhere, and then see what you can roll out, like one at a time over to, like once like things are going well, then you try this one. And then I try not to be a dream crusher and just like capture it. And like, let's figure out like what is a realistic timeline and when you might add that in.
Kelly, is there anything else that I missed that you would like to add at the end of this conversation? Anything that you are interested in or passionate about, or have wanted to talk about or say to an audience of people that are thinking about cooperative development or what that means for their farms or their agricultural businesses?
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I was on a panel at the Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference that was, broadly cooperation, collaboration in the food system. And, one of the folks on that panel was a producer and had been part of a small scale marketing co-op that had struggled, gotten going, struggled for a while, ultimately kind of came apart. And so, he had kind of more of a negative, was certainly imparting about like how hard it is to do these things. And we were asked, one of the messages I tried to impart in that conversation is that just because you might not start a marketing co-op or be part of a co-op for a farmland purchase, that there are ways that cooperation can like improve your life as a farmer, right? So like, can you work together with a group of people on childcare? Are there, I don't know, right? Like there's a lot of spaces and places in our lives that might be ripe for cooperation, that make our ability to farm easier. And my take-home message with that group too was that whether or not you ever, start a co-op or get involved with a co-op, if you ever have the opportunity or can, seek out the opportunity to do some sort of, facilitation training, conflict mediation training, any training that's related to like functioning well in a group, we all have spaces in which we need to function in groups. And we don't, in most of our formal education, we don't get training. We get thrown together to do group work, but we don't ever get told like, and this is the good way to go about it. And that like, these are skills that can come into play in so many ways. And so, and ultimately, these are the skills that like I spend most of my time working with folks on, right? And so I just encourage folks to like go all in on like learning some facilitation and group work skills, because they will serve you in one way or another in your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have any resources top of mind that might be available to people who are listening to this?
So I went through this really intense facilitation course that was offered for a long time through UW Continuing Studies, and several of my coworkers, we've all done it. And I used this book.
Is it Nonviolent Communication?
No, it's not nonviolent. I mean, that's also reading in that is also great. I will send you a link to this book.
Okay.
It has some great facilitation tools. I was also just in a great training today as part of this extension conference about integrative facilitation. We have one of our, we recorded a webinar in 2020 that just gave a very rough overview of some facilitation techniques and things to consider in board meetings and stuff like that. It's on our website. I can send you a link to that. But yeah, there is a lot out there, and even if it's just like listening to a podcast or watching a video for an hour, or having the time to read a book, like, or actually attend some sort of course, like, it's knowing how to work well in a group is invaluable.
Whether you realize it or not, you're usually working in a group, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Whether it's you're at your farmer's market, even though that's your booth, you're working with a group, or with your team, with your family, with
church, school, community organizations. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, Kelly, thank you for being on the show, for sharing all of this. I love to have a cooperative development specialist on every season, and this is great. I feel like there's a lot of ideas here to get people kind of thinking about different ways that cooperation can happen, maybe some outside of the box. I really liked what you said about cooperating in other areas of your life to make farming easier, even though it may not specifically be farming. Thank you for being on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My thanks to Kelly for taking the time to share all of that good advice and some of her own work with us. Thank you to Michael and Michelle for turning these podcasts into things that you can listen to. Willie Houston for the theme music. Our sponsors, Grow Organic, ASAP, Farmhand, and High Mowing for their contribution to keep this free, as well as our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/no-till-growers. So if you like the fact that pretty much everything we do is provided for free, you can help us keep it that way and support our work for just a few bucks a month, because many hands make light work.